Meeting to order. Motion to approve the agenda, please.
I so move, David.
Second,
Second, Dave Morris.
moved and seconded, question? All in favor?
Aye.
Carried. We have an agenda. Conflict of interest, if any.
None here.
David? Well, year-end projections and recommended reserve fund transfers. Gary Payne?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm going to take you through our projections of where we expect to finish the year for each of our various funds for which we will have reserve fund recommendations for you. We've had a positive year financially. All of our funds are projected to finish with surpluses. So we're looking to manage those with what we put into our reserve funds, which can be accessed in the future by the board. So the first fund that we'll look at is the Cooperative and Regional Planning Services. So
Mary, sorry, Kelly. Put it up on the screen. Sorry.
we'll just take a second so everybody in the room can see it. What happened there? Okay.
You want Excel for it? Just click your Excel button.
What?
Just click your Excel button on the bottom.
The Excel button? Why? Is this dead?
Your computer's just not protecting the screen.
It's right here. So did you do share? Do you have share? Okay. Yeah, I don't know what's going on. Can everybody online see it? Brett, can you see that?
I can see it fine.
Yeah, we can see.
It's not talking to that screen.
Okay.
It's not going to TV. Well, that's okay. We all have it in front of us. I'll be
Alright.
Thanks. Dave.
All right, we'll keep going and everybody can just look at their papers in front of us. Something's happening there. Okay, so cooperative and regional planning. So the layout is the same for all of the different funds. You have our budget for 2025. We have what the actuals are to the end of November, what we expect to happen in December, and then the column that we'll be focusing on is projection 2025. So that's where we expect to be at the end of 2025. So for cooperative and regional planning, we expect our revenue to be 1.556 come the end of the year. That has to do with, we had a small surplus in our SSF funding that came in. That was higher than what we had budgeted for. And then the other funding where you're seeing the additional 1.18 million, that has to do with the pool and what we're doing there. So you're going to see, if you look at administration expenses down below, the same overage there. There's a slight variance because we actually did have some administrative expenses, and we'll talk about that in a second. But that's what's driving the overage in other funding and administrative expenses. And those two balance each other out. So the net cost to the commission is zero. So on the expenses side, the difference between the pool funding and the expenses is actually what was spent in the cooperative and regional planning, which was just over 40,000 for a couple of professional services studies that were done during the course of the year. Our corporate service expense allocation was under budget by about 45,000. So what that means is we could transfer 30,000 to an operating reserve for cooperative and regional planning. And we would have a projected surplus of approximately 27,000 when we finish 2025. Transferring 30,000 to our operating reserve would produce a balance of 60,000 in that operating reserve, which is overfunded because our reserve fund policy did have a target of 30,000. So we're going to have a surplus in that reserve fund balance, which we can look at when we do our 2027 budget if we want to claw back some of that and reduce the member charges accordingly. So it does give us the most flexibility if we put it into the operating reserve. If we were to do nothing, it would just stay in the surplus and it would come in automatically in 2027. So this will allow you to choose when you want to actually access it.
All right.
Any questions there?
And those funds do remain accessible in 2026 through motion.
it is absolutely accessible in 2026 yet. So we could draw on that if there was a project that came up and the board wanted to undertake that. We could use those funds at any time by board motion.
But they are only accessible by motion of the board.
Absolutely, yes.
The chair, Director Rogers has a question.
Oh, okay.
You can't see her, but
Hey, Director Rogers?
Sorry, I should have put my hand up. I'm so properly. I just had a question about, and I know, and I didn't know when to ask it because I know there are going to be quite a few recommendations that we go over our policy limit in our reserve fund. And I hear what you're saying, Mary Kate, about the fact if we do leave it in an operating reserve balance, it means that there's options. However, if we follow the policy, respect the limit, and then put it towards surplus in 2027, it could offset contributions by some of the members, right? Like, so I guess that's what I'm thinking. When we added them all up, it was we're reserving 55,000 more than the policy, which for Fredericton equals like $33,000, which, you know, it all adds up. So I'm just wondering if they're like the rationale, what I just heard you say is if we do it this way, it just gives us more options. But what it does remove is our commitment to making that surplus, getting that surplus back to the member, back to each of the members. So is there a reason for that?
Yes. Mary Kate?
If I may, Mr. Chair, thank you. Yeah, that's a great question. So we can accomplish the same thing, Director Rogers, by doing it to the operating reserve, because that operating reserve is now going to be overfunded. When we look at the 2027 budget, we will be looking to draw that down and use some of that to offset the members' costs because it is overfunded. So we're going to get the same result to reduce the cost to the members. We just now have flexibility whether we do it we can't change member costs in 2026, but we could use this fund in 2026. We can use it in 2027, or we can carry it forward as the committee decides.
And carry it forward is what's being suggested here, it would seem.
What's being suggested is to put it in the operating reserve, and then at the time that the board decides to make a motion to take it out of the operating reserve, it could be used to reduce member costs, the earliest of which would be 2027.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Director Clisson?
What I'm hearing in this, I guess, and my take on it is if we don't put it in reserve, we leave it in the operating, we have no option. It just automatically comes out against our member fee for the next year. If we put it in reserve, we can still take it out of the member fee, or we can just keep the member fee as projected for that year. So we have more options with reserve than we do leaving it in operating, in my opinion.
Any other questions? I think there's another side to this that part of what Director Rogers is referring to is that we are over our own policy. And that leaves us the risk of actually overspending purposely, or moving money into next year's budget that could be spent. This will not necessarily, the board that sits around the table in June will not necessarily be the same board that's sitting around the table now. And they could choose to spend funds above and beyond the reserve limit that we have set as policy as part of their decision making. We could do that too. So I think there's a little bit of gray area that we're starting to move into there with setting a policy limit and then going above the policy limit. And I just think it needs to be thought through.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Like some of them are significant above policy limits. I think that's what was concerning.
Mr. Chair, through you to the committee, I would say that we've proven that we've been good fiscal stewards of the commission funding, of the funding of the communities. And I think we'll continue on that road, and that it wouldn't be the intention of the staff to recommend such actions as to negate any of the positive impact that we've had to date. So.
Yeah.
And if I may add one more, it's important to note that those targets are minimum threshold targets too. We want to have that as a bare minimum. If we go over, then we can take steps to bring it back into that minimum. So we know for some of those funds, because we have not had activities ongoing for the last 3 years, and there is significant surpluses, I think it's particularly with transportation. We will bring that back in line, but the amount that we have is a minimum threshold. We could absolutely go over if the board did decide on.
But they're, I can't remember the percentages exactly, but they're all over the 5%
Yeah.
that a normal
And-
municipality would be working with. Okay. No questions? All right. Thank you. That's right.
All right, the next fund that we're gonna look at is planning and development services. So for planning and development services, we're projecting revenue of just under 2.5 million. That's about 130,000 over what the budget was. And the reason for that is additional RSSF funding that was received that covered some of additional costs that were included below. On the expense side of things, we're projecting to be over in administration expenses. The reason for that, what's driving that, is professional services. That has an overage because of 3 rural plans that were done by firms rather than in-house, just because we did not have the staff time to be able to do that. So those are ongoing. In salaries and benefits, we did have some vacancies and a staff member that was out for a portion of the year. So you are seeing some savings on salaries and benefits. Both building inspection and planning and development services are pretty close to budget, as is our planning advisory services, and we were underspent on our corporate service allocation by about 34,000. So what that means is we could transfer 40,000 of this surplus into an operating reserve for planning and development, and we would finish the year with approximately a surplus of 41,000. So kind of splitting it between operating reserve and leaving some of it in surplus. The operating reserve has a target of 255,000. This would put us at a balance of 204,000 to the end of the year.
Any questions on the planning and development services? I guess from those that are participating. Okay.
Great, so the next projection we'll look at is the solid waste division. So the solid waste division, we talked about this the last couple of finance committee meetings. We were seeing a trend that garbage tonnage was down. So we do expect we'll finish the year around 1,350 tons less than what we had budgeted for. But we were fortunate in that construction and demolition tonnage was up by about 3,200 tons from what was budgeted. So those mostly offset each other, which was great. Our other income is what's actually driving the increase from what was budgeted. And that has to do with additional asbestos waste that we received, as well as soil tonnage, remediation tonnage that we received. So that's where you're getting that additional 231,000 from the budget. And then the recycling was about 45,000 over budget. Portion of that is the one-time sale of the pieces of equipment. So overall, we're projecting our revenue will be about 258,000 over budget. On our expense side, we are less than budget for our salaries and benefits. Our maintenance costs are over budget. That's being driven by additional HHW costs. We do have savings on fuel and equipment. So the amount that we're paying for per liter for fuel is less than what was budgeted. And we're also having some savings on the maintenance side because we are doing some of the maintenance in-house, like oil changes, which previously were done by different companies. On the baler costs, you're seeing significant savings there, but that's going to be pushed into 2026. So that's something that will come up. So there's no refit costs in here and there's no wire costs, but those will have to be done during the first quarter of 2026. On the administration side, we are seeing an overage, and that has to do with engineering and professional services. Our debt servicing is under. We did not purchase the piece of equipment that we had budgeted for in 2025. We decided to defer that. It wasn't necessary, so there is some savings there. And then our capital expenditures, there is an overage there. That has to do with work which was done on the gas lines as well as gas detection. Our allocation from corporate services is about 10,000 higher than what was budgeted. So what that means is for 2025, we had budgeted to transfer 50,000 to an operating reserve and 625,000 to a capital reserve. Because of some of these timing differences, and they are going to happen in 2026, like there's a car conveyor that's in process, but the materials did not arrive. So we're seeing significant delays from when we order things to when they actually arrive on site. As well as there's a forklift that was budgeted to be purchased in 2025 and it has not arrived. It's going to arrive the first week in January, unfortunately. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna put that additional savings into reserves, but there is a chance that we would have to draw on those reserves in 2026 for those 2025 projects. So what we are recommending is 50,000 to the operating reserve. That's in accordance with the budget. But the amount that will transfer to the capital reserve is recommended to be 1,150,000, which would bring the capital reserve to a balance of 4.8 million. Again, our target is 9.6. And our operating reserve, the balance would be 615,000. Our target is 1.15 million. And that would leave a surplus in the solid waste division of 165,000. Again, I expect that to change as actuals come in, but that's the estimate at this point in time.
Any questions? You were there, that the, some of it is, will be gone. It isn't like we're really building big into our reserve.
It is, we'll have to watch that in 2026 to see if we have to, probably to the tune of about, I would say 250,000 is what's outstanding from 2025 that won't be finished until 2026. So for power generation, this is the one fund where we underperformed on our budget. So we had expected to have an amount of about 692,000 that we could transfer to the reserve fund. Because of the complications with our transformer, Brett. It's one of those.
Transformer, Mary Kay, you got
Okay. That's my equipment knowledge. So we had less revenue that was generated and we had additional maintenance costs. So our revenue was about 301,000 under what we had budgeted because of that downtime in the engines. And then our maintenance cost is about 282,000 above what we had budgeted. So because of that, we are not going to have the amount to transfer into the capital reserve that we thought we would. We are still going to produce a surplus and we're able to transfer 70,000 of that surplus to the capital reserve fund, which you'll remember we're trying to build up so that when the engine has to be replaced, we will have the target of 2.2 million so that we can pay for that from the reserve fund rather than having to borrow, which is what we've done in the past. So if we transfer 70,000 to a capital reserve fund, that will produce a balance in the capital reserve of 964,000 and will leave a surplus of just under 69,000 in the operating fund.
Any questions on the power generation?
Tourism and promotion is the next fund that we'll look at. So we have a slight overage in revenue, only about 4,000. That's due to additional regional services support funding that we received. And then on our expense side, we have a little bit of expense savings. So we did not spend 15,000 in the administration expenses, and our corporate service allocation was about 4,300 under what we had budgeted. So what that means is we can establish operating reserve tourism promotion. For tourism promotion and transfer 12,000 in there. That would leave an operating surplus of 11,000 for 2025 and just allow us to get reserve funds started for tourism promotion.
Any questions there?
The next,
When the funds are primarily regional service support fund. We're still tied to their requirements for those, so they are all kept separate.
yeah, so we have to match the 50-50 cost share. So if we didn't meet the 50-50 cost share, we've got to carry that forward and overspend in the subsequent year.
Thank you.
So regional transportation is the next fund that we'll look at. So for 2025, we expect to have revenue of about 257,000. What you're seeing is we did receive additional RSSF, about $4,000, and then we received other funding, and that funding related to the transportation study that is underway. So it paid for all of those costs in 2025 related to that study. On the administration expenses, you are seeing an overage, which is the transportation study, but in actuality, because that was covered by the funding we received, we actually had some savings because urban rural rides only charged us 50,000 for regional transportation when we had budgeted 86,000. That was the amount that the board had agreed, that 36,000 would come from our own funds. And urban rural rides determined that was not necessary in 2025. So that's where the cost savings are coming from. Our corporate service allocation is under slightly from what was budgeted. So what that means, because of the cost savings for urban rural rides, we do have an amount that we could transfer to an operating reserve. We recommended 15,000, and that would leave a surplus of just under 19,000 in the operating fund. Again, we are aware that this is significantly over what the target was. We just felt as staff, and we did discuss it, that putting it into the operating reserve fund gave us the most flexibility going forward as to how to use those funds. Same as we talked about with cooperative and regional planning. So what that means is in the operating reserve, we would have a balance of 161,000 after this transfer. The target was 22,000. So it is significantly overfunded, and we will have to come up with a plan on how we want to use those going forward, most likely by the time budget season comes for 2027.
And just to clarify that, because the largest portion of the 161,000 is the largest portion of that made up of the support funding. And how does that all unravel?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say it's like half of that would be from regional services support funding. We will have to make sure that we are using and matching our 50-50 cost share within the 3-year time limit that they give us. So yeah, that's something that we will have to balance in 2026 for sure.
All right, any questions on this? It is,
Dr. Rogers.
yes, okay, Director Rogers?
I don't know where it was. Thank you. It's such a significant amount above our recommended amount, you know, like 700% higher, something like I'm just wondering, it's clearly signals a bigger problem. Like I did hear you say, Mary Kate, like sort of where, you know, some of the rationalization, but it's so much above. I'm wondering, I guess I would ask staff, beyond what you'd said, which explains a little bit of it, what does it signal, the larger message that we're getting from the fact that there's so much reserve there? Is it that we just haven't figured out as a group what to do with that funding, or?
If I might, Mr. Chair, and then I'll maybe ask Brett to speak to it. It really took us a while to get up and running with regional transportation. So we had budgeted in 2023 as if it was running and what we needed based on what urban rural rides was going to cost. It did not happen in 2023. Then again, in 2024, we did not use the portion that CRSC had budgeted for. So I don't think that it was a misuse of funds. It was, this is what it's going to cost. We just weren't at a point where we were ready to implement the entire contract. And we're still seeing that in 2025 because it's only costing 50,000 rather than the 86,000 that was budgeted, which is what the board had agreed to pay for that service. And I'll just add,
I'm saying, I didn't see it as a misuse. To me, though, it's when it's that there's that much discrepancy, it is signaling something. So I guess what I'm hearing you say is we were hoping it was going to get up and running faster. We thought that it was going to cost more than it actually was. I think it's an awful lot to go above policy.
so we were not up and running is the reason for that. Yes.
Yeah, but will we be ready? Are we going to be ready to be using the amounts that we've been, like we're saying we're holding on to it, but for what? are we going to be ready to be using that money, or is it something that would be better just to make the decision that it goes back into surplus for 2027?
I'll ask Brett to speak to that because I know the transportation study is coming, so that will help inform some of those decisions.
Through you, Mr. Chair. What I would say, Director Rogers, is that I think it does speak to the reluctance of some communities to adopt the volunteer drive program offered by Urban Rural Rides. We weren't anticipating that. I think, barring a major decision by the board to undertake some additional transportation role in the future, I would expect that we now have a trend that we're able to see. It's difficult to do that in year one, maybe year two, but in year three, I think we know where it's going, and we'll be able to get a little closer to the mark and maybe use some of those reserve funds to offset costs to the municipalities going forward.
Okay. Director Rogers, any further question?
No, I just don't know that that's what it's intended for. Like to me, like the others, I could have. This one, I really don't feel that. I feel that it should be surplus for 2027. But yes,
I do. Other questions?
Director Fox has-
Dr. Fox.
Yeah, I'm having trouble with this one too. And maybe for some different reasons, but we struggled with having a service in our own community that was replaced as a one size fits all with Urban Rural Rides, and that might be part of the reason that it hasn't had a lot of uptake. Part of it, I don't know what the answer is, but I think if we're going above our policy on any of these, and then I'm just going to make this statement blanket, I think they're taxpayer funded, and if we've overtaxed the taxpayers and we've got these surpluses, then someday they should get it back, and that's where I stand on all these. I think the policy, I had trouble with that to begin with, is as a municipality, we're maxed out at 5% of our operating budget. And some of these exceed that, and I have trouble with that personally. Like personally for me, I think we should, if we've got over and above what our policy calls for that we approved, then it should go to surplus.
I share that viewpoint. That's my viewpoint too.
So since we don't make motions here, though, I do hear recommendations. And I hear that as a recommendation that needs some discussion, I guess, at this point. And we will take a moment and do that. But before we do that, I just wanted to go back to Brett, your comment. So characterizing the reason as communities being reluctant to participate. And I would say that's incorrect. We inherited a model that we had very little input to, and it was very early in the game. And there were duplications of services that we are now double funding. We fund one service in our community and send money to the Regional Service Commission for another part of funding that we're required to. So the system just isn't working. The new model isn't working. Urban Rural Rides are not working for our community. So I think there's more than one, and I'm concerned about when I hear it characterized as reluctant to participate. So
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, Mr. Chair, what I would say, I would clarify, it's not my model. This is a model that was prescribed to us by the province during the reform process, and it certainly isn't something that we developed in-house by staff. I think I might have been misunderstood. I recognize that there were already existing transportation services in the communities where Urban Rural Rides hasn't become active. I'm in no way a proponent of what of the approach that we're taking. It's simply one that was prescribed to us in 2022. Beyond that, and so that speaks to the $36,000. There was a resolution to that effect a couple years ago to roll out urban rural rides region wide. But beyond that, it was difficult to anticipate that urban rural rides would not be invoicing us for any amount, and that was a challenge this year that wasn't expected. The last input and recognizing that this isn't a uh, um, hugely valued mandated service or area of operation. We were yet to complete the transportation study that was undertaken this year. There were some delays with the consultant, and so we were undercharged for that. So the cumulative value of all those items is what added up to this surplus. Just for clarification.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you to the members. It's also reflective of the fact that we also were able to tap into other funding sources to help over the past little bit to move forward with the regional transportation study and things like that. So those weren't anticipated things. Those were things that we actively went out and pursued, and therefore we're able to help create I guess this today. And in terms of that, I think we have to also be cognizant of the fact that we can't predict the future. If something comes forward in the new year that we are there and that we're able to develop a program or a service, there has been some expressions of interest from around the table to do some projects on regional transportation, but awaiting this study. Then at that time, we may be very thankful for a healthy surplus in that area.
And so, Director Chris.
I'm a taxpayer as well as everybody at this table is. Tax dollars that are taken in never go away until they're spent, like whether they're operating it or on reserve or whatever. It might delay it a year or two or whatever to reduce that tax burden, but it's not like, I guess I'm going with what Director Fox said. It's not like we're burdening the taxpayers and taking more unnecessary money because it's not spent if it goes into the reserve. So I have a little issue looking at it from that angle, I guess, so.
I think we have two areas of discussion that I would like to spend a couple of minutes on before we proceed, because I don't sense clarity around the table in terms of where we are. And that is, I'd like to come back to Director Rogers' comment about there seems to be something else here. And I think that something else may be the lack of success in implementing this program. And I have to have that on the table when we're going back to the board to make a recommendation to the board, because I'm certain that the board will have comments back to committee, say, why are you recommending this piece? So we're not the transportation committee, so we will not talk about the way it functions or whether it functions well or not, but we have to look at, is that where we want, as a finance committee, is this where we want to put 161,000 or 15 this year? So, Dr. Nickman?
Well, so the way I see it is that by putting it into reserve, we can by motion look at reducing the fees moving forward. The fear obviously is that another project comes up and exhausts the fund, and then the money does not go back to the taxpayer the way in that fashion, but it does go back to them in a service. So it is with a mixed emotion. I don't like being off on budget ever. I think that budgeting is important and that we should be close to our budgets. We should know what we're attempting, and this one just appears to me like it was a failed attempt to getting it off the ground. That's all. And that, if it doesn't happen, and the trend, if the, as Brett said, the trend is moving, that we know what the trend is. I'm not so sure on that one. The rest of them I see very clearly. It's just, could be timing errors, it could be whatever, you know, it's gonna come together. But, this one, I don't see it coming together quite so clean, and that, and I would agree that there was some reluctance, for communities, my community for sure, with, urban rural rides. We were going in total different motion and we did not stop, so I can say that, so. I still agree with the fact that, and the other thing I'm confused with is, even though we say move 15,000, like isn't that like 50 cent dollars too, that we'd be moving as well in there? So it's not, if we decide to go against that, it's not like we're gonna take that back, we're losing 50% of it right away anyway.
We just have to make sure that we spend our portion of
Right,
it.
right,
That's
yeah,
the big
okay.
one.
All right, that's my opinion.
Director Morris?
My problem's a little on the different side. Some of these mandated services that were shoved down our throat by the province. This one is obviously not working. Urban rural rides, there's been a fiasco. I mean, they can't get volunteer drivers. That's the core of the problem. So I think in this particular one, and there's probably others that we should be getting back to the province. We've been at this now, what, 3 years? And this one's not working. And why should we be spinning our wheels doing something that's not working? You know, the province stuck us with it. Get back to them and say, look, it's probably not just us in this region, it's probably regions all around the province. So why are we wasting our time spinning something that's not working? Get back to the province and say, look, this is not working. We don't want it, you know, go back to with whatever you want to do with it. So I would suggest the board either put together for a study, use some of the surplus, put a study together, go back to the province, say, look, this is where we're at. This is not a good mandated service, you know, it's not working, so we don't want it. That's my 2 cents worth anyway.
There is a transportation study on its way. Director Chris?
I don't have a ton more to add. I guess when we were interviewed the other day by the consultants, I gave my opinion on the mandated lines. I think some of them are important to some communities, some of them are not. This transportation is definitely more important to some communities and not others. And when I look at the city, the biggest payer of this, they have a transportation system. I don't really know what they need on this line, but they're mandated to it, because they have their service, so. But this was taken from the RSSF funding and the municipalities. And it needs to me, it needs to remain in that vein until we figure out what we're doing with regional transportation. I can live with whether it's surplus or whether it's reserve. I do lean toward the reserve because it's more flexible, but I can live with either. But it does have to stay in transportation till we figure out what we're doing with it and where we're going. So I can see everybody's point of view here, really.
Director Fox? You're muted.
Yeah, I was just trying to find my mute button. It disappeared on me. I'm just gonna stand by what I said earlier. I don't like the idea of because you mentioned it earlier, could be a very different looking board here in June of 2026. Who may not have that context and that history and make decisions that we may not have otherwise made. In this case, I'd rather not have any options and have it put in as surplus, and then we bring it in 2027. And if it saves everybody some money in 2027, then that's great.
Director Rogers?
Yeah, I guess I feel similarly. I mean, I struggle in general about us not just applying these to surplus for 2027 to be used and to be brought back for 2027. But this one in particular, because I think we're all agreeing, it just signals something that's not working. Taxpayers have been making contributions. through our allotment in all of our communities through our allotment for something that is not working. And so maybe by putting this back as surplus for 2027, that's our way of saying this one did not work and we're returning the money to the communities. I just think that's an important message to relay. And and also, you know, the province needs to receive that message that putting transportation on regional service commissions to figure out is not the solution. There needs to be a regional transportation plan for our province of how it is that we're connecting the communities. And I don't feel that that should be put on a regional service commissions as mandated services. And we see why. We're seeing the complications of it and getting that up and running. So I think this was one that we've exceeded by, it's 732% above our policy limit. And I think policy limits are there for a reason and we should be trying to honor them. But nonetheless, this is one that I really do believe we should take a different approach to, because I think it's caused for a different reason and we should acknowledge that. And so I'm saying that, and now I have to leave. I have an announcement at the airport at 1 p.m. So I have to drive out to the airport. So I have to say farewell to all of you. I'm sorry to have to go. This is an interesting discussion, but Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
One second before you go. We do not vote here. However, I do feel the need to clarify that if the choice was to put this into surplus or to put it into reserve, where the committee would be on a general consensus level. I don't sense that we have a consensus, so I would like to hear quickly. I'm hearing you say, is it fair for me to say you would say surplus?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
great. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Good luck with your announcement.
Have a Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman.
Sir.
So were you about to say something on that?
Go ahead.
So, Mr. Chair, through you to the members, with all due respect, in looking at this, we come into 2026 and we have an opportunity to maybe do something different to what Director Morrison was saying. Some of the others were saying there's an opportunity to move forward. We still want to be able to get that, have that board consensus and have everybody that would like to move in that direction. And that's what I think that hopefully in terms of that, putting it in the reserve as opposed to into surplus, I think, and I understand the desire to reduce the cost, and hopefully that will be things that we do in the future. But again, to my earlier point, we can't predict the future, and if something great comes along in 2026, we want to be able to act on that as well. Thank you.
I don't have much to add. I will just add that the majority of the operating reserve was already sitting in there from 2 previous years. We're just talking about 15,000. So if you decide to put it in surplus versus operating reserve, either way, it's not a big issue for me.
Any other? Okay. So in general, though, back to Director Fox's point, we do have the issue of this one motion of the 15,000. And since the total is already in there, it seems that it's mute almost at this point to have that debate. But in general, the others, and even this one, Director Fox's point that if we're over our policy level, should we be making a recommendation to the board that they never go over their policy level? That's what I'm hearing.
I don't know how you do that with the timing errors and things like that. Like it's impossible. Or you're gonna deficit one year and a surplus the next year and a deficit the next year. It would be trouble.
And I might add, those targets are bare minimums. They're not like, this is the ideal where we want to be. This is like the base level. This is where we need to be financially stable. Yeah.
What else? Understanding that, we will have this debate at the board table. It won't go away. I just want to make sure that we're all clear on where we are coming from. I will, in my role, read the recommendations as put. Unless this committee tells me not to. That's my role will be in that, but I will speak to them as well.
I agree with that.
I think it will be a healthy debate and a lot of, for a lot of issues, so.
You see, as long as we can make a recommendation to the board, we're good then.
Okay. Sport and recreation.
Yep, last one. So for sport, recreation and cultural infrastructure, we do have revenue. It's about 16,000 higher than budgeted due to additional RSSF funding. The other funding has to do with amounts that we received for the trail connectivity study. So that covers some of the costs there. On the administration side, we had some underspending by about 34,000. Corporate service expense allocation was under by about 4,000, which means that we could transfer 25,000 into an operating reserve, and that would leave us a surplus of just under 29,000. Now the target for that operating reserve is 15,000, so we would be over our target, minimum target, if this reserve fund transfer went ahead.
Any questions on this one? All right. I do have one question. These funds, these reserve funds, are they, do we segregate them as we would a utility, for example? Must that fund stay in the category that it's allocated for?
Yes.
It's
You cannot use sport, recreation and cultural infrastructure funds, whether it's reserve, operating, or regional transportation. They are their own self-contained funds, just like your water and sewer and your general operating.
So the risk of future board of taking the money out of regional transportation and putting it into a new marina would be wouldn't be a risk then.
Yeah,
Or a new ball field in Harvey would be a risk then.
it has to be used for the purpose of.
Oh, thank you. That's an important clarification because I think if not, it looks like you're putting money away for, slush fund kind of activity. So I don't see that. Director DePussy.
When we talk about a new board, we're gonna talk about that every 4 years, because it's inevitable, the board will keep changing. And I think, since I've been on this board, I think this board is very accountable. And I think the service commission and the staff is even more accountable to keep this board and the next board and the next board in line, and, or not just in line, but where they should be. So I just don't think about whether any of us are here or not in June. It will still be accountable by elected people, in my opinion.
Any comments?
Mr. Chair, sorry, Mr. Chair, just back to Mary Kay's point on the reserves. These are the base minimums that we were looking at. And I think that should be just a point of consideration as we go through the motions of the board. That those are the minimum we were looking. And it's about building also for the future and not having, to Director Nicklin's point, a rate or shock. You have a surplus 1 year and a deficit the next year and that type of thing. We don't want to put people on a roller coaster. I just want to say that I commend, to Director DePlessy's point, commend the staff and their team here that they do a great job in keeping the fiscal balance in the ship moving forward. Yes, we might have one area there, that looks high, but as to what was discussed, it's really a reserve moving into a $15,000 question as opposed to $160,000 question. And that's the issue at hand moving forward. And how we do that is we hear the board, and I don't believe there's been a case since January 1, 2023, that we haven't heard this board and reacted accordingly moving forward. I think we've got a good track record of that. And we've got a good track record of fiscal responsibility and prudency. And I think the board needs to take that into consideration as well as the committee as we move through those motions. And like I said, we tend to hear, we listen, we go back, we meet, and then we react in terms of trying to build that positive way forward. So that's all, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
I don't think quite the same way on those issues. I believe in policy and procedure. And I believe in good policy base makes a good organization. You can change your policy and work through it. But if you have individuals making decisions in an organization without strong policies, things do deteriorate quickly and not just over time. So, as Director Nicklam said, budgeting is an incredibly important piece. We work hard to get it right, and when we get it right, we should try and abide by it. And when we create a policy piece, if that policy piece isn't working for us, then the policy piece, if it's financial, should come back on the table, because as soon as you create a rule and break a rule, you have no rule. And it's as simple as that. And so I'm hearing a pretty clear message here. My plan at this point would be to read the recommendation as presented. And then I will say that there was close consensus to moving forward with this, but not consensus from the committee on all issues. Depending on the motion, there were some variances and waypoints to that. Is that a reasonable representation of your position right now? Okay. Anything else?
So I think most were in favor of the surplus, weren't we? I think most people on the board were in favor of the surplus.
Yeah, yes, well, I think so. Without taking a vote, I think I would want to, I wouldn't want to say that, from my point of view, as chair, is to say that the board was unanimous in all recommendations. I think because there are a number of them and they vary widely. I would say that there'll be some discussion, so let's let it.
So you're gonna read all the recommendations as they are here today, and you're gonna let the board,
I will read each one, is there, yes.
and let the board vote on.
My understanding, if I'm correct, Don, is that these are all separate motions. And I will read one motion.
Right.
And we will have a discussion or debate on that motion. We'll read another one. And once we get through two, the third one may be easier. And we'll move through, and there will be some consensus at the board level that will develop one way or the other. But I don't see at this point that we have, there are 8 motions. So I don't think we have unanimity on 8 motions at this point. Other than the 2 choices seem to be surplus or putting in surplus or putting it into the reserve account. On the reserve account, I will say that I don't know how, in our community, we found it to be absolutely worthwhile to keep that reserve operating account at max one. And if we could go to 10%, we probably would. Not because of the access to the funding, but because of the access to the funding at the beginning of the year and when major expenses come forward. It creates a flexibility when the opportunity presents itself 6 months earlier than you anticipate. And you just simply do not have the funds unless you have that. There has to come back to a council and they'll have to come back to a board. The board will have to vote to take those funds out. So in each case, there's probably almost always without an emergency meeting, a 30-day time line in there that things have to happen. So I don't think it's high risk, but back to Director Fox's position, it's if we're building up hundreds of thousands of dollars of that, then it could be perceived by someone outside of the organization as not being appropriate, so. Okay. Nothing else, we need a motion to adjourn. I think covered everything.
Motion to adjourn, Dave Morse.
Second,
Kevin Lickman, Green Light.
all in favor?
Aye.
Question? Okay, all in favor? No. Motion carried. Thank you.